According to the Egyptians, the continent lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, thought to be the Straits of Gibraltar. This was the gateway to the Atlantic Ocean, a place the Greeks had only heard about.
The Atlantic Ocean was a mysterious place where you could sail out. Many ships did sail out and never came back again. It was sort of, to the ancient Greeks, the infinite unknown, much as space is to us today.
Could translation errors also have obscured the time period when Atlantis existed? Solon claimed it was at its peak 9,000 years before his own time, but 900 years is more likely. It was then that cultures strikingly similar to that of Atlantis thrived throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Could the lost continent simply have been one of these civilizations? It was at that time, 1500 BCE, that equally momentous events were defining other regions of the world. In China, scholars were developing writing on wooden or bamboo slips developed from pictographs. In Central Europe, tribes began to cremate their dead, storing ashes in pottery urns which were then buried. The Egyptians added copies of the Book of the Dead to coffins, hoping that a just life would bring immortality to the deceased. Could this period, 3,500 years ago, have been the time Atlantis may have existed? Or was it much earlier? When we return, explorers uncover a spectacular palace and a perfectly preserved city. Almost midway between Athens and Egypt, amidst the blue waters of the Aegean Sea, lie two of the southernmost Greek islands, Crete and Santorini. Today, the islands are a magnet for tourists from around the globe. They come here to savor local village life and to enjoy the breathtaking views. Santorini was once known as Thera. Its soaring cliffs speak of violent upheaval in ancient times. Once crowned by the tall peaks of a majestic mountain, the island is now but a remnant of its past. Where tour ships now ply blue waters, there was once miles of rolling landscape. But in about 1628 BCE, in a volcanic explosion of unprecedented magnitude, most of the island was destroyed. What remained slowly collapsed, finally disappearing beneath the sea. Today, all that remains of soaring mountains are brooding black rocks, an eerie reminder of past grandeur. The events that once tore the island asunder are best understood through a visit to the north coast of Crete, some 60 miles away. It was here that British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans began digging at an ancient city called Knossos. In 1900, he uncovered a huge palace, a treasure trove of architecture and art, which tells of a sophisticated seagoing people with wide influence and power.
They probably controlled the entire eastern Mediterranean, and it wasn't military control so much as what appears to have been economic control. So they were a very sophisticated civilization.
There was no name for these long-lost people. Because Evans found artifacts of elaborate ceremonies involving the sacrifice of bulls, he dubbed them Minoans, after the myth of the Minotaur, a creature half man, half bull.
They hunted after bulls with staves and nooses, but with no weapon of iron. And whatsoever bull they captured, they led up to the pillar and cut its throat over the top of the pillar. Plato's dialogues.
The more Evans dug, the more he noticed similarities between the lifestyle and culture of the Minoans and those of Plato's Atlantis. But even though Knossos seemed strikingly similar to Atlantis, it had not sunk into the sea. Still, many sensed a link between them. In the 1930s, a Greek archaeologist, Spiridon Marinatos, began work on the island. He was to make a startling discovery. Studying the ruins on Crete, he found rooms partly filled with volcanic ash. Then he noticed that entire walls of buildings along the coast had been physically moved by as much as 200 feet. How did this happen? Were these signs of violent invasion or something more sinister?
This is not what invading people do. And he kept getting this picture of a tidal wave coming through the area and dislodging these stones and dragging them. And he kept looking in the direction of the island of Thera.
Studying accounts of earlier volcanoes and tidal waves, Marinatos realized it was possible that an eruption on Thera could well have set off tidal waves strong enough to move huge stone walls on Crete, 60 miles away. Geologic evidence shows that around the 16th or 17th century BCE, the volcanic mountain that once graced the center of the island erupted violently, spewing dust and smoke high into the upper atmosphere.
We know it was one of the most violent volcanic eruptions ever since human beings have been on this planet. We might have had what we call today a nuclear winter because there was so much dust in the atmosphere that temperatures might have fallen.
Observers as far away as China wrote of darkened skies that obliterated daylight and chilled the summer. More than 3,000 years after the eruption occurred, Marinatos stood surveying the island, his keen eye searching for telltale clues. If anything could have survived the catastrophe, he was convinced he would find it. He sensed a connection to Crete and through it to Atlantis.
No one would accept this theory, not even Marinatos himself, unless he found anything less than a Minoan city immediately underneath the volcanic ash. So he started searching on the island of Thera.
His search was temporarily interrupted by war and lack of funds. But 25 years later, in the 1960s, Marinatos' efforts brought results.
There was a farmer that Spiridon Marinatos had made friends with, and the farmer had been curious about these peculiar sinkholes on his property. And one day he was on his donkey and one of these sinkholes opened up right under him. And he fell into the earth and looked around and saw traces of pottery and a wall. And essentially he and the donkey had just fallen through about 4,000 years of time into somebody's living room.
Marinatos had discovered one of the most spectacular archaeological sites of all time, a Minoan city called Akrotiri. Structurally, it had been preserved by volcanic ash, tightly packed like the contents of a huge packing crate.
The excavations now going on at Akrotiri are the most exciting excavations in the world, at least as far as I'm concerned. We have here a city that's been frozen in time, that exists exactly the way the people who lived there left it. You can walk through the streets of this town. You can look in their doorways and see the pots they were using before the destruction struck. You feel as though you're walking in a ghost town.
Though the people of ancient Akrotiri were long gone, their houses, pottery, and art spoke of a worldly people living in peaceful harmony with nature.
The most fascinating aspect of Minoan civilization is the art. And you